Thank you very much for that. I think I agree with it. What I'd like to do now is rather than go through in enormous detail a kind of cookbook of how one might approach marketing going forward, I want to share a little bit of our thinking and our kind of workings on how you come to terms with this incredibly complex world that we find ourselves living in. What do you say if you work in an agency today that you actually do for a living? Do you make advertisements? Well, maybe. Do you produce films? Do you do what we used to do in a big way? Do you produce junk mail and send that out to people all over the world? Well, you still do that to some degree, but it doesn't seem to us that really captures the sense of what our business is doing and what we need to do on behalf of our clients to really affect change. So I'd like to talk a bit about the provenance of data, data, alpha, beta. I prefer beta because it rhymes, not beta. But, you know, we'll disagree on that one. How did we get to it? And it was really a search for meaning. It was really a cry for help. Because when you start to think about where marketing communications are going today, and you think about the number of different platforms and opportunities that face you, it's very easy just to get lost. There's just too much opportunity, too many great things to do. When you listen to Mike talking about Juiced, you know, I just want to rush out and put all my budget into Juiced now because I'm so convinced. But I know if I sat down with Electronic Arts, I'd be equally convinced that actually everything should be going clearly into gaming tomorrow. And I met with the president of the Word of Mouth Marketing Association in the UK yesterday. I'm not quite sure what the Word of Mouth Marketing Association do, but he also convinced me to put most of my clients' money behind word-of-mouth marketing. And apparently it's got nothing to do with the internet. So there are all these different platforms out there. How do you find a sense of meaning, that a mental model that can guide you through making those asset allocation decisions that ultimately can potentially transform your business and make your work effective? And there have been many attempts at trying to describe this. And I think most people never want to hear 2.0 anything ever again described. But you know, Web 2.0 was a great mental map to start to understand why certain technologies, certain applications were winning in the new environment. And I guess the fact that all of you are here means I don't need to go into the kind of the various ways of describing how Web 2.0 has worked. But the problem with Web 2.0 as a mental model is it sort of describes, it tells you why something was successful, but I don't think it really gives you a sense from a marketing communications point of view as to how you would go about doing it yourself. You can see it, you can recognize it when you see it, but how do you actually start? How do you move towards creating that kind of value? And I think there are, from a creative agency point of view, there are perhaps some more entertaining ways of describing the world that we live in. And here's a piece of user-generated content that attempts to describe the world through one person's vision of the sort of complexities in front of us. And there's some great stuff here, the Blogipelago, the Wikipedia project connecting islands together in a space, the sea of memes. And you can describe all this stuff, and there are many different graphical representations of this. And to some extent, if you put that on your wall as you sit there and someone comes and presents some advertising to you, maybe that does help you a little bit, thinking perhaps there's some uncharted territory here that we haven't explored. But again, it's probably not sufficient. So we sat down in one of our regular management meetings, and lots of account people decided they had to have a mission. We had to think about where all this was going, and lots of long, complicated sentences with sub-clauses and definitions were ready to be put up on the wall. And our creative guy, and thank God we had a creative guy with us, actually just sort of blurted out this idea. What about data, data, alpha, beta? And because it was a creative guy and lots of account people were there, everyone just ignored him and carried on having a conversation about the long sentences that we were going to put together. And I had a very bad cold at the time, so I wasn't really participating in the discussion that was going on. But it just struck me that this was brilliant, that this really, in one way, in a kind of elevator pitch, summarized so many of the disparate elements that need to come together to create real value in the new kind of digital economy. Data, data, alpha, beta. And it rhymes. So we can't go wrong. Let me talk a little bit about how that actually plays out. And Tim, I think, eloquently touched on some of the key tenets of that. But let's take that a little bit further. It is this sense of rebellion. It's this sense of taking what was the commonplace and adding something else to it that makes people see the world very differently. And isn't that really the secret of the stuff that's breaking out on all those different platforms that we talked about earlier? Isn't that the stuff that's really going to be successful on a platform like Juiced? Something that's just takes some current things that exist and puts a different twist on them that allows us to engage with it. Taking everyday objects that you see in one place, packaging them, putting them together, and adding new meaning to them. You're going to see this toilet a lot today. You've already seen it twice. Little did you know when you came to this you'd see urinals 3 times. The idea of turning a commonplace, revolting toilet upside down suddenly becomes an art form. How can we look at the things that exist in our current world and repurpose them in a way that will engage consumers in this new space? It's perhaps easier than we think. And I think we also need to be cautious that when we take these objects and re-put them into a new context, we don't just dismiss them as what the world was before. So the classic case is Google. What did people say as Google started to develop? Well, it's just classified advertising. Well, it clearly is a bit like classified advertising, but the whole kind of database of intentions that drives from that and the business model that comes from it, Google is much, much more, because of the network effect, than just classified advertising. And obviously search underpins so much of what we're doing. So let's be cautious before we repackage things based on the categorizations of the past. This kind of pastiche, this early bringing together of disparate objects in the Dada movement is essentially the same as the mash-up today, taking new things, putting them in a new context, and creating new meaning and new levels of engagement. And isn't that what we're doing every day at our most successful? This is something that many of you may have seen, and those of you who work at Ogilvy or go to Ogilvy conferences, I apologise because many of you have seen it a lot of times. It was a double Grand Prix Cannes winner at Cannes last year. Cannes is coming around again, and we promise never to show this film again after Cannes this time. But for those of you who haven't seen it, this is a piece of work that was developed originally as a $20,000 film to support a group session in Canada to talk to our young people and young women in particular to look at their self-esteem for the Self-Esteem Fund. It turned out to be perhaps the most famous advertisement in the conventional sense in the world last year, and it's for Dove. So that began as a $20,000 investment in Toronto. I think the current number is 200 million hits across the world against that. And what was interesting was it was uploaded that night, and it started to suddenly move. People started to track it. Clients started to be aware that this perhaps had a bigger potential and a bigger opportunity than they'd originally thought. And they went with the flow. They took the feedback, they tested in other areas, and the thing just built a momentum of its own and grew into something much, much bigger than purely the Self-Esteem Fund in Canada. But what's really interesting also is that when you start to get a movement across that space, strange things start to happen. And that whole engagement of the community on the idea and thought also creates some rather surprising outcomes. Here's another piece of film, which I'd like to share with you. I think it needs no real introduction. And that says, thank God our perception of real life is distorted. No one wants to look at ugly people. And if you're a marketer, how do you react to that? Do you try and get that taken off because it's undermining the august principles behind your campaign, or do you go with it and realize that actually, in its kind of subtle dislocation of the original thought, it actually amplifies the core idea? So our clients at Unilever have been very supportive in showing that and other examples of that as they take this message on, and it just amplifies the effect. But you need a certain nimbleness and a certain open-mindedness, a Dada approach to these things if you're going to take full advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. Again, rather like Lonely Girl 15, that was actually a professional production company who saw the opportunity to leap on this and produce something that they could use as a credential themselves. You know, and what we're really looking to do is to just go into the social graph, into the blogosphere, and pick up what's happening in that space and utilize that space in new, innovative ways that often aren't that expensive. And that's hard for an agency to say, that often aren't that expensive. Here's a great example of thinking laterally in a Dadaist way about a client opportunity. A client in the US called Six Flags. Six Flags is a theme park operator, and they were opening a new theme park, and they wanted to give away 10,000 tickets to get people to trial the park. What do? Radio commercial perhaps in the local area, television commercial dramatizing the space? No, it was in the San Francisco area, so our creative director suggested go to Craigslist and just write a simple message on Craigslist, hey, some guys are giving away free tickets at this theme show, are you interested? Within one day, all of those tickets had gone, media cost zero. Level of engagement, because a friend recommended people to do that, and because of the media it came through, I would argue much higher than paid-for media. So I think what this means is there are many alternative ways you can get your message done, and one shouldn't think traditionally in terms of conventional media to get it. There's still a role for it, but Dadaism is about changing things and using new assets in fresh ways. So if we just summarize where we think we're at on Dada, it's about re-evaluating and redefining all of the elements of marketing. It's about co-creation. It's about bringing the consumer and getting them involved where possible with your message. It requires a high degree of lateral thinking. And we would believe that actually for all the scientists, and we've heard from scientists already today, and for the fact that science and algorithms are driving more and more of marketing, it's still ultimately a creative challenge. And creative people, we believe and we hope, will still have a role in this wonderful future if we exploit the thinking of Dada. Let me come on to the second tenet of our thoughts, data. Data is clearly everything. Effectively, we live in the world of the big brain, and every one of us uses data in combined ways in our lifetimes in ways we perhaps never thought were imaginable. If you look at the large aggregation sites on popular, the Digs, the Delicious, the Reddits, we're combining and matching data in a way that's really astonishing. If we look at our lives on Delicious, on our Facebooks, each one of us is a centre of a huge amount of intelligence that never before seemed possible. The question is, how do we as marketers start to harness some of that and use it to our advantage? I won't even go into that, we have too many. So the parallel, I think, between how we move from the data today that exists in each of our systems and each of our little private universes to exploiting it in the new future is to draw a parallel between art. So if you go back before the 19th century, if you wanted a representation of your world, if you wanted a representation of your family and you could afford it, you commissioned an artist to come in and paint a picture of you. There was a technological breakthrough called photography, and I'd like to thank my mother for appearing in this photograph here for me today. You actually had a sudden breakthrough. You had a realistic representation of that person. And no longer, because of technology, was it necessary to do what you did before. Did that mean that art was over? Did it mean that the painter no longer had a role in society? Not at all. It liberated the painter to go away from what was there before and think of new ways of seeing the world. So arguably, without photography, you'd never have had Cubism, perhaps the greatest art form, certainly in recent history. So data gives us the power to do new things in new ways and see the world differently. One of the greatest examples of how data transforms the storytelling concept is something like Nike Plus. When you combine a pair of trainers with your iPod and the power of the internet, suddenly the product takes on a whole new experience. Suddenly you can connect yourselves with runners and other people around the world. You can challenge yourself in new ways. You can challenge individuals. You can build a huge database of engagement around that. So there's no longer a need to necessarily show someone just running down a road alone. as the way you sell this. It's about an engagement, it's about an experience. That's because of the power of data aligned to a core message and a core thought. Here's another example on Dove, where we actually ask individual women, real women around the world, to upload their own picture added to this space, deepening their engagement, creating a constantly dynamically changing view of real women around the world and how they're engaging with these products. Again, only possible because of databases that sit behind that. Here's a fantastic example of how we're combining technology to create new advertising formats for our client American Express. For our client IBM, sorry. IBM sponsor the Grand Slam tennis tournaments around the world, as I'm sure you know. Traditionally, we would advertise that by showing exciting images of people diving and hitting balls back and forward. What a better way to take the advertisement and add new meaning to it, to actually do a live banner with scores driven into it. So this ad, you can see, you can go from court to court, you can watch a game appearing live. It provides a whole new level of utility and engagement, and I would argue excitement. So the ad banner, one of the sadder formats perhaps in the digital world, suddenly becomes engaged with new power and new meaning through our ability to connect data to the advertising format. So data. It's all about, obviously, metrics and accountability. It allows us to make some of those bets that Mike was talking about earlier. But it does also allow these new forms of storytelling to emerge that are much more dynamic because we can infuse our media channels with databases. And it allows for a form of value exchange like the Nike Plus, like the Wimbledon viewing or the Roland Garros viewing that allows a new form of value exchange. And of course, if we look at that data, if we take that data on board, it allows us to constantly optimize our performance. So if our attempt to build a video in Canada doesn't work, we can switch it off and leave it there and try something else and then add and build to it as we go through. And ultimately, where that gets you is to a really massively distributed personalization of the advertising experience if you allow people to engage with your content and customize their own content. And I think perhaps the most important part of this is that I think the essence of being successful in the new age is to push the role of the marketing department and the role of the agency kind of round through 180 degrees. If most of us spend most of our time making stuff kind of in the advertising factory and pushing it out to people in the past, then arguably we should now be spending 80% of our time in our user groups, looking at the web, looking at the blogosphere, looking at the data, giving us a steer on where we want to go, following our customers, empowering them to engage, and moving our marketing with that. It's a much more reactive engagement rather than this kind of broadcast model that so many of us have grown up with. That's very difficult to do, but the data that lives in the big brain is the way you can actually start to do that. Alpha. Well, the alpha dogs. We know that in the current world, these mavens, again, that Mike referred to earlier, are key to success. They're the leaders of the packs. They're the loyalists for our brands, hopefully. They can be the evangelists, and of course, there can be the people who care about what we do, care about the world, and they're the people who share. They're that 20% of people on things like Juiced who are actually pushing stuff around and sending you those notes. So if we can actually identify those people and the negative elements within that group, then our marketing potentially can be revolutionized. We've always known, those of us from a direct marketing background, about the 80-20 rule, that actually, even in terms of purchase terms, 80% of our stuff is bought by 20% of our customers. But I think in a digitized world, with the network effect, the messaging side of that is amplified even more greatly. So if we can find the key loyalists, if we can find the key communicators, who may not even be great users of our brand, but are opinions that others follow, and we can engage them with our message, then we have a much greater chance, I think, of being successful. If we look at that in a quite simplistic way, we take we manage Starwood's loyalty program, and we allow top Starwood members to customize their experience in the way we might have done in an analog way in the past, by sending them stuff, they send stuff back and the rest. Here on the website, you can basically choose the kind of images from maybe your favorite resort and package that on your card. So every time you engage with Starwood, the world, your favorite hotels are the ones that come up to you. Obviously, you can customize a lot more than that. That's a very simple way of just using technology to customize an experience and create greater loyalty. But you can go even further. If we talk about those mavens, if we talk about those I guess MySpace is the image that always comes into one's head, the committed MySpace engager. What we find is that they're not usually committed to just one platform. The true evangelists are actually on everything, everywhere, Patu's one of them in the audience here. If you can get your message into that group, the effect that you can get from broadcasting out from an individual like that, if you can get it right, is absolutely amazing. And the maths are mind-boggling. And I'm sure you can imagine if any of you have teenage children. And these are the true believers. I'd like to share a rather scary piece of film with you. And this is a person who became, through video blogging, very famous in the US, of indeterminate sexual origin, talking about his views on what happened to Britney Spears recently.
Her song is called Give Me More for a reason, because all you people want is more, 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 more! Leave her alone!
True passion and commitment. But there are people out there who feel that way about widgets too. If you can get them on your side, then you can make a real difference. I think many of these conferences, people laugh at General Motors for their attempt to put the tools of production in the hands of their best customers. And we know that they created some film assets, they put them out there on the web. You could make your own film, and you could do your kind of overlays. And people laugh because guys came up with things like larger than any normal mortal needs. The whole eco group grabbed that in a big way. And why not? What a great opportunity. And to some extent, you can't blame them. However, what's more important is that those people were probably never going to buy a large Chevy Tahoe, I think we can safely say. But the people who actually like Chevy Tahoe and want to buy it produce their own lovely, eulogies to the joy of this huge machine. And arguably, aren't those the people that actually you want to engage with? So sometimes, if we empower people, we have to be able to filter out those negative images that come from it and actually celebrate that we're doing something for our people. And by the fact we're doing it for our people, we potentially alienate some others around us. But I would argue the power of that is much stronger than just a bland message. So the Chevy Tahoe. And here's another bizarre one. Not that appealing on the surface, where Jockey, the underpant people, challenged people to engage in exciting displays in their underpants to see who could come out. They're called the Jockey Wars. It takes a certain degree of creativity to sit in a room and come up with that as your core marketing plan. And I don't know, that's a test, I guess, but the potential for engagement, the Dadaism in that thought, I think is pretty exciting. And we should all, I think, be doing things like that at the periphery, at least, of our programs. I think the other thing that's relevant about these mavens, about this individual, is that you can no longer attempt to find them in one place. Your ideas need to be portable. You need to be building in cross-platform engagements. This is where someone every day goes and has their lunch and writes their blog from. You've got to be able to connect them through Wi-Fi to do that. You've got to be able to taking the opportunities to bring things like desktop widgets to people's world. We're huge believers in widgets. I think we were one of the first, one of Yahoo's first broad-scale clients. And there's almost no client for whom a widget application or a Google gadget can't find a role in its space. And I urge you, it's not a difficult thing to do. I urge you to try and put your brand into those environments, because those people who want to hear from you, those people who feel you're relevant, if you can package it up creatively, will bring you with them wherever they go. And of course, the iPhone has made that even more relevant. Here's a great example of something for the true believers that we produced in Singapore for Johnny Walker. In a small environment like Singapore, we put a PDA concierge, where you could a rather attractive girl there who actually changes her clothing from the day, where she's dressed up in office gear, through the evening into sort of evening wear, guide you through a series of events. What's happening in the key bars in town? Are there promotions going on? There's the ability to go to a webcam in some of the key bars and actually see who's in there, see what's happening, see if it is a happening joint. You can even, after you've drunk too much in the bar, with one click, get a taxi to come and collect you and take you home afterwards. So you're providing a genuinely interesting and engaging service. You're doing it in an entertaining way. And if you can get your message on someone's PDA, on someone's phone, how powerful do you think that might be? So finding those loyalists and giving them engaging applications is I think, where the future is going to be for us. Here's another example of trying to take a relatively complicated message and surround your target audience with it. trying to find those true believers. This is, again, some work for IBM. IBM's core message over the last 12 months or so has been around innovation, and the idea that IBM, I think it's true to say that as IBM becomes perhaps a more complex organization, a lot of people don't, with the PC business no longer there, a lot of people don't entirely understand what IBM does anymore. It's a complicated business. So the innovation campaign is about setting the amazing things that IBM does in the context of real solutions. So their work with the New York Police Department, their work on bird flu. And we produced a series of mini documentaries to support that and put them on multiple platforms. So wherever you were already, you could potentially find these interesting and engaging stories. Some of them were ads, but the advertising component was a very small part of the distribution strategy on that. We also worked with CNBC to produce a series of awards on the subject of innovation. So innovation shows, innovation content. This is actually on Fox, mini docs. We're on Juiced, I'm pleased to say, so Mike will be happy with that, with this content as well. We're broadcasting, we're on Forbes.com. We're broadcasting on some of the early trials on broadcast TV in the US. So we're everywhere with this. We're surrounding and engaging our customer. However they want to engage with our content, we're there in an entertaining and I think relevant format for the space. So alpha, finding those customers who care is key. Finding those people who share, who may not care, but if you can engage them in the right way, can add huge amplification to your message. Clearly, good experiences lead to positive word of mouth, and as someone was telling me yesterday, word of mouth is good. But you've got to be transparent, you've got to do things that are useful, and you've got to, where possible, provide the opportunity to collaborate and participate, as we heard from Mike earlier. Let me come on to the last of our space, the perpetual beta. And I think this is the most important element, if that's the only thing that people decide to take out of this. And that's that today we are never finished. Today when we, how annoying is that? I'll switch that off. Today, you do not sit in the laboratory, in the office with a creative team, the client and the agency, and come up with a brilliant idea that's going to transform the world. Now you might, but given the competition for eyeballs and for experiences that exist out there, it's most unlikely. What we think you need to do is to be making lots of bets. Not those tiny little investments that Mike talked about, and I totally agree with him that, taking 2% of the budget and investing it on Juiced, you're going to learn nothing and you're going to go nowhere with it. So there need to be thoughtful bets and there need to be sequential bets. But we have to be recognizing that inspiration comes from the blogosphere, from the marketplace. We quickly build on that, we move. We see if we get a success. If we get a success, we invest more behind it. We explore adjacencies and we move on. It's an entirely dynamic business that we operate in now. It would be great if we could just make a television commercial. And in some places you can for some categories. But that really is no longer going to be the model that we have going forward. We live in this world of the perpetual beta, driven by the fact that there are so many new opportunities. We've heard about Moore's Law again today. I won't go in there. We are keen experimenters. This again is a Google gadget that we produced again for Six Flags in the US. Putting a game out there early on, the take-up of this was astonishing for us, and it's just a great way of engaging with our audience. So try these things out. The cost is not prohibitive. Here is something completely different. Ogilvy never suggested to anyone that they should ever do anything in Second Life. I'd just like to say that now, because that's over, I guess, with one exception. If you want to go to the IBM developer community, then these are the people who have the technological nous and are prepared to live in an environment like this and operate. It's not for the mainstream, but for the right audience, it's a tremendous opportunity to engage. The way we decided to work with IBM in Second Life is we barely produced the thing. We half-skinned it. So we gave them the kind of outline code, we gave them some directions, and then we said, finish it yourself, since you're so smart. And they are so smart, and they did, and the outcome was amazing. But it's developing the content in a new way, in the right way for your audience. And Second Life has got potential for the right groups. Here's another example of taking that beta thinking and applying it to the way you develop your marketing, this time for our client Cisco. Cisco is another company where, even though it's all around us and arguably it's powered the growth of the internet in many ways, it's quite hard to figure out what they do, and they keep buying other bits as well, so it's even harder to know what they do. essentially, we felt with them that what they were doing is they were creating this great human network. They were connecting people together through all the different technologies they've got. But we weren't sure whether that was very plausible or very engaging. So actually, the first thing we did is we put a page together on Wikipedia where we tried to define what we thought the power of the human network might be and how that could work. And obviously, then other people started to engage with us and to flesh this out. So we had something that was kind of validated in a way probably more interesting than conventional research for the human network. And then we started building our advertising campaign and our communication campaign out of it, into the homepage, into various vignettes, taking it to different channels. So a campaign built with consumers and people within Cisco formed a huge part of that using videos and uploads and the rest, as you can imagine. So that's probably our first example of a truly beta campaign that we developed that ended up having significant dollars put behind it globally. So beta, it's really where marketing and product development start to coexist in a different way. It allows the consumer to help define where we're going and allows us to respond to their needs. And in many ways, and I like the idea of this, direct marketing is really the future of advertising. Those old principles of direct marketing start to play today. And digital really becomes the future of direct marketing, which is why I guess Ogilvy One have been driving these VERGE events from the core. These rapid changes in the media landscape, those new great opportunities like the juice that we heard about, that we can get so excited about, require us to have a different model that requires constant, sensible investment and testing strategies as we go forward. And that is how we arrived at the basic thought of Dada, Data, Alpha, Beta. You can say it to someone in the lift. If your mother doesn't know what you do for a living, you can explain it in Dada, Data, Alpha, Beta. And as I said earlier, when Tim doesn't say it, at least it rhymes. Thank you.